This segment is about COPRA's expectations with respect to the resources that you need to pursue your mission. Are they sufficient? Are they adequate? Feel free to stop the video at any time and study a slide more closely, but we encourage you strongly to download the slides because they're accompanied by notes that have more detail that could be helpful. And you should certainly plan on sending at least one representative from your program to the Accreditation Institute at NASPA's annual meeting, because that's where you'll have an opportunity to practice and apply the concepts and tools that we're talking about in the video. Standard 6.1 is all about support. It's all about, do you have what you need? Every program wants more resources. That's a given. And it'd be great. There's no program that really has everything that it needs. Some have more resources than others. COPRA understands that. The question is, do you have the resources that are sufficient for you to pursue your mission? And if not, what's your plan for obtaining them? Resources are inputs. You use the inputs productively. You use the inputs to increase your effectiveness. This is a slide that appeared in one of the earlier videos because it really informs the way we in COPRA think about inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and are looking for programs to think about them in the same way. There's a very strong focus on outcomes in terms of a mission-based accreditation model where you have evidence-based decisions and it's outcomes-oriented, but you can't get outcomes without inputs, so inputs matter. And this standard is really about how do you transform your inputs into outputs that generate outcomes pursuing your mission. So when you look at this slide again, what you should be asking yourself is, how do you explain to COPRA whether you have the resources you need, how you're going to get them, and how you transform them into outcomes that matter? Well, adequate and sufficient with respect to what? What are the kinds of things that COPRA is going to look at? There's a list here of things that are pretty standard. COPRA doesn't set minimum standards for each of these categories of resources as to how much you should have, whether it's a dollar value, a square footage of space, space per person. That we don't have those kinds of standards. It's mission-oriented standards. What do you need to pursue your mission? So COPRA is looking for evidence that these inputs and any others that the program is going to need support your mission. And if there's evidence that it's not supporting your mission, then the program ought to have a process in place, a plan for trying to remedy it, that it's going to monitor and COPRA will monitor. So the emphasis is on this connection between inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Think in terms of the accreditation triangle: mission, process, and outcomes. Now, there's lots of things that can cause a red flag. A red flag, again, doesn't mean that you're not complying with a standard. It just means COPRA is going to stop and take a little bit closer look at that sort of thing. All sorts of resource red flags. What if you've had a pattern of declining budgets during a period of years when your enrollment is increasing? Well, there might be an explanation for that. The burden is on you to provide that explanation. The explanation, you might expect a pattern of increasing budget as enrollment is increasing. If you see graduate students undertaking tasks that might otherwise be full-time employment or part-time employed staff, like graduate students who may be even recording grades, you say, well, that doesn't seem exactly right. Is there a reason for that? How can we explain that? What about if you have different campuses and different levels of support on different campuses, different resources devoted to different campuses? Is there an explanation for that? If you have students who are turning heavily to adjunct faculty for career advice, they're a great source of career advice. But is that satisfactory? Is that sufficient? Is that intentional? Is that the way you want to run the program? So if you have a program that's experiencing these kinds of red flags, COPRA wants to know that you're monitoring your program, that you're aware of potential concerns, that you're addressing them, and have plans to improve upon the situation as best you can. So having adequate resources for your mission is to some extent defined by you and what you need. COPRA is willing to sort of listen, have the explanations, talk to more senior administrators at your institution if need be. It's all a question of your providing sufficient documentation and evidence about the situation. In some situations, there can be multiple campuses, and if there are differences across sites, then how do you explain those differences? At every site, and this is increasingly common to see multiple sites, then programs have to be able to demonstrate that it's provided the same kinds of opportunities and resources for its students to be successful, to fulfill the program's mission, regardless of the site. The same thing is true on different modalities of delivery. You don't necessarily need classroom space or as much in an online delivery format, obviously. But whatever your modality, if there are differences across those modalities in the resources, there ought to be an explanation for that. And it ought to be tied to your mission. And at the end of the day, if you can show that the outcomes are essentially equivalent regardless of modality, that's what COPRA is looking for. You have a process in place to identify those outcomes, to measure those outcomes, and if they are different, that you're addressing those differences so that you can pursue your mission. This is not just about accreditation. This is also about improving public service.